Welcome to this new section where we're going to talk about the component router and forms in Angular, two important features that will allow us to build complete web applications. In this video, we're going to see how to use the router to emulate multiple pages in Angular. First, we're going to see how to support multiple screens in a single page application. Then we're going to see how to configure the component router to make this happen. Then we'll take a look at how to use the router outlet to define where components get loaded. And finally, we'll see how to pass parameters to routes. So how to support multiple screens in a single page application. As you know, Angular is designed for single page applications. Most of the time we need more than one page, more than one screen to display our data. And that's where the component router comes into play. The component router allows this by basically loading components based on URLs. So for instance, if the URL is /dashboard, then Angular would load the dashboard component, /login for a login component, and you can route as many components as you need like this. In order to configure the component router, all we have to do is provide a routing table which maps a URL to a component, and this file is usually called app.routing.ts. So on the example here, if the route is /if, then we're going to display the ngIf component. The default path, if there's nothing specified, will load the hello component by default. And if the path is HTTP, then the HTTP component will show up. And finally, to make all of these routes available to the router module, which controls the component router, we pass them to the router module as follows down here. And then the next step to have the component router up and running is to define a router outlet. And what the router outlet is a placeholder where routed components will get loaded in our HTML template. So in the example here, we have a list of links, we have a title, and below all that we have a router outlet. So when we click on the /if link, it's going to load the ngIf component based on the previous routing table, and this ngIf component will be displayed right here where the router outlet is located. So now let's see this example in action. So this is my component router component loaded for an example. So we have our three links here, and as expected, since the URL is the default one, what we get now is the hello Angular, the hello component loaded. Now if I click on the ngIf example link, the URL will change, and now we see a different component, which is my ngIf component. And then when I click HTTP, it changes again down here to a different component. So all of this happens without reloading the page. Angular is in charge of the routing and just loads the right component at the right place. So now let's take a quick look at the code for this example. So this is our routing table with the three different URLs that link to three different components. And that's a main component that I called app router that has the three links and the router outlet location that determines where the routed component gets loaded. And finally, to get all of this up and running in my app.module.ts, all I have to do is list the routing import here. And the routing is basically the object that we create in the app.routing.ts. So that's a constant right here, which is the config of the router module applied to the routes that we created. And once we do that, the router is up and running and our component behaves just like we saw a few seconds earlier. Now, in order to make routes even more useful, it could be interesting to pass parameters to our routes. So for instance, if we navigate to a details component that would display, let's say, the specific details of an article in a store, for instance, in an online store, then we would like to pass the ID of the article as a parameter in our URL. So that's what we're doing here, and that's how we would define that parameter in our routing config. Then once we have done that, in our details component, for instance, we could inject an instance of the activated route service as follows down here, and then use it to subscribe to the param_map property. And what this does is gives us a subscription that allows us to watch these parameters. When they change, we get notified automatically, and we can register this new ID and display the right data for that component. So in this video, we just learned that the component router can load components based on a URL. We know that we have to define a routing table for this to happen, and then we provide a router outlet to indicate where the routed components will get loaded in our HTML. Finally, Routes can have parameters and we can subscribe to parameter updates.